This is the Open Global Mind weekly call on Thursday, April 10th, 2025. Still feels funny to me every time I say 2025. It's like, wait, how did we slip a quarter century into the new millennium?
Hmm.
But somehow, time flies when you're having fun. Hey,
Yes.
Klaus, we all having fun now with the
Well,
tariff roller coaster?
the thrill a minute. The insider trading
Thrill.
roller coaster.
Crazy stuff. Yeah, I haven't caught up on all of today's news.
Yeah. Well, the Dems were
Um,
starting to jump up and down about that yesterday. Jane has been pointing out for some time, really, her reaction when whenever people say the stock market has plummeted and all this value is lost,
mhm.
that's happening because people are selling shares. But if people are selling shares, people are buying shares. So
Right,
as
but
values are
they might
declining,
be they might be selling shares at a loss, I think, is the way
yes, they are selling shares at a loss, but somebody is buying them. You can't sell them
Yeah.
unless somebody's buying them. And so if you step back and look at the dynamics of the last couple of days, that $5 trillion of loss, somebody bought those shares at those lower prices, and somebody has sold those shares at the higher prices yesterday. And
Right.
if the speculation turns out to be true that those are insiders, this is way bigger than Teapot Dome and all the other messes we've had before.
There's way more money to be made if you put in put orders, right? I mean, if you anticipate either a drop or an increase and you bet against it, you can make money that way. Yeah, and if with this kind of insider information, yeah, I mean, Adam Schiff started the ball rolling by starting an investigation there. But so you investigate, so you find out that these guys basically are stealing money. Then what? Who's going to sue them, right?
Well, we'll see.
So maybe we should just turn this call into an investor's guideline call for making a profit during the Trumpocalypse. How about that?
We need other people on the call to do that.
My son
I
called
am
me
kidding.
yesterday. My son called me yesterday. He and his wife have $500,000 in cashed out, and he wanted to get advice on where to invest. I said, invest in a CD. You know, this is a complete casino right now. I mean, you can absolutely not bet on where this market is going. China is still out there. You know, they are amassing military in the Middle East now to get engaged with Iran. You know, I mean, there is some.
Wait, you're saying Chinese military in the Middle East?
No, the U.S.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, big time. You know, they have put up a lot of capacity. I was doing a search on that yesterday. So chances are we're going to get into a war with Iran. This is increasing significantly. Yeah.
One time. Yes.
The floor is open for productive topics for us today. Mike.
I tuned in and thought I was hearing a worst case scenario, but maybe we should do that. Maybe we should each of us give a 2-minute discourse on just how bad it could get. And that might inoculate us against what could happen in coming months if it doesn't get that bad. I had an office mate when I was at MIT. He lived life in the most negative zone possible, and every week was a surprise because it just didn't happen. It wasn't as bad as it could have been. I'm not that way, but it is a strategy. We could go the other way, and we could all share the 2-minute. How do we get out of this and paint a rosy scenario? I have a couple, and that might actually be more interesting. And then the last comment, 3 weeks ago, I sent around a report, the Global Happiness Report. This is done by Gallup. And maybe, again, this could be a mood lifter, and talk about how some countries have stayed happy and some countries have even become more happy through better policies, better attitude, better leaders. Chinese menu.
Chinese menu, indeed.
Or do all three and just each do one for 20 minutes.
Well, on the World Happiness Report, it says that eating out with others is very important to happiness.
Yeah, if you do it if 14 of your 14 lunches and dinners are with other people, that's almost as good as 13. That's the optimal number, apparently, if you want to be happy. When they look at country by country, the people who eat out 13 times or eat with friends. I mean, they eat at home, eat at a nursing home, wherever they eat, as long as they're eating with someone else, they're happier.
I think last week you said it was 12.
No, I said 13.
Okay, I want to go to the videotape.
Yeah, roll the video. Roll the replay.
Because I remember thinking,
The internet
"What
never
is the
forgets.
family?" I
The
remember
internet,
thinking,
yeah.
okay,
I'll see if I can find that factoid and post it in the chat.
I believe you.
Any other suggestions for topics for the day?
Maybe what you can do locally, local engagement.
Well, there's one thing that, Mike, you didn't mention in your negative and your rosy scenario, which is what if it actually works?
That is definitely one of the rosy scenarios.
What if Trump's play works?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you read behind Trump's play and read Bannon and a few others, this is a very intentional, focused, strategic attempt to overturn the global economic order of the last 80 years.
So far, I'd say the overturning is going quite well in terms of overturning.
Well, the breaking is going well. What settles out, see. But the rules-based, collaboration-based economic order is being turned into a thug economic order. But there's another thug rising.
Well, that sounds like a good novel title.
Yeah, it does. Strategically, it's the classic Trump play of push and see what happens, and then step back if it doesn't work. Somebody commented last night, he throws up these tariffs and everything screams, and he pulls back, says, okay, we're going to wait for 90 days. And they said, like, why didn't you just announce that these will come on in 90 days if people don't negotiate with us? And the response from the Trumper was, well, no, we wanted to really get people's attention and get them scared because we negotiate better that way. We'll see.
You forgot the other part of the Trump game plan.
Yeah.
His most important art is saying three things at the same time. And in a White House that's so fractioned and so broken by differing ideologies, it's really easy to have 3 or 4 goals articulated very vehemently by 3 different groups, and Trump will repeat each one. So in the morning, these tariffs are going to raise so much money. We're going to make so much money. These are permanent because we need that money so we can reduce taxes. And then around noon, it's, we're going to pound our enemies into the ground. It's going to be permanent, but maybe our friends will talk to. And then in the evening, it's, well, our friends have to take off their tariffs too. So we have 3 different game plans explained in 12 hours, which is, of course, why the market's going crazy. And they're even pulling money out of U.S. savings, U.S. bonds.
Yeah. And the news business was boring.
There was yesterday, within 5 minutes, the Treasury Secretary said one thing to reporters, and then Trump said something opposite.
We have a nice queue that is formed, so I would like to go to it.
Just real quick on that. Did everybody see what happened to the U.S. trade representative who was on the Hill testifying about how tough these tariffs were going to be and how we weren't negotiating? And in the middle of the hearing, Trump announces that he's putting it all on pause for 90 days.
I did not see that clip. It must be a fun clip to replay.
It's magical.
Trump people need to
If
learn how to pivot very quickly.
if anybody wants to find that clip and put it in the chat, I would be very grateful. Pete.
I don't know if I would have picked this as a topic, but I find it really interesting. I think I have a love-hate relationship with the pronouncements from the White House or whoever that this is actually a plan. It looks to me like a bunch of children who think that they're in charge and they have no idea what's actually going on, and they have no idea what kind of destruction they're wreaking. So I think there is a mastermind or masterminds behind this, and I don't think they have the US best interests in heart. But, you know, so for better or for worse, we've had Pax Americana for 50 years, since World War II, right? The US was at the pinnacle of global superiority and global influence, and a lot of it was soft.
Mhm.
You know, you spread money around, you educate people, you tell them what you think, you look like the good guy. We've been doing that since World War II. And if I wanted to take that apart, this is exactly what I would do.
Mhm.
I would convince the US president and the leadership, whatever, that they are absolute effing geniuses and that they've got a plan to yank the economy around and make all the other guys shake in their boots and stuff like that. I think there are a bunch of grown-ups around the world watching this in shock and horror and utter despair. And then there are a few adults who are going, well, okay, this is where we take apart Pax Americana, you know, more power to us. So it's just like, you know, I don't know that Pax Americana was the best thing for the world. It had its ups and downs and goods and bads. And there are a lot of bad things that came out of the, you know, globalization and technology superiority and defense superiority that we've had for the past, you know, 50, 70 years. You know, maybe it's time to take that apart, but I don't think the children in the White House are the ones that are in control at all. And the more that they think they are, the better the tactic of using them as a wrecking machine is. So that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
It's interesting to note that the Pax Romana and Pax Britannica had their low points as well. Stacey.
So I have a question that keeps coming up for me, and I don't have enough information to even come up with plausible ways that to answer this. So I wasn't going to ask it here, but I will.
Please do.
Is there any possibility, and I don't know how that would play out, so I'm not looking to make this a conversation, but in what way could this have to do with cryptocurrency? Is there some kind of thing that anybody has some insight to give me? Because it really is a question that keeps coming in my head.
As far as I know, the Trump family is quite invested in cryptocurrencies and is busy in a gigantic conflict of interest, which surprises no one these days, busy launching cryptocurrencies in the middle of creating crypto policy that will favor themselves. So there's a bunch of that happening. Somebody else, so Eric writes in the chat, CBDC, which would be a central bank digital currency. Lots of countries are trying to figure out how to replace their physical currencies with digital currencies, which is also a crypto play. So don't know about that. You know, how that's playing out now here. But if anybody else has a deeper answer to Stacey's question, I'll bring you in right now. Mike.
You answered half of the issue, which is the conflict of interest. But Trump is going to make a hell of a lot more money because cryptocurrency is being used to send anonymous bribes directly to Trump.
That is so handy.
The most obvious was it's very handy that he has a meme coin that he can sell to anybody who wants to send him money. And
because it used to be they had to rent a floor in his hotel.
Yep. The most obvious example is the crypto CEO from China who's being investigated by the Department of Justice until he went and bought $50 million worth of Trump meme coin. Within a week, the investigation disappeared.
Damn.
But this is definitely happening. Sometimes it's government bribes, and because it's just magical.
Pete, with a brief answer.
It's an interesting question, Stacey, and I think the way to look at it, I'm not a super expert or anything like that, but crypto is kind of the millions and billions sloshing around here and there, and it's a way to hide chunks of money, possibly big chunks of money. It's also a way for stupid people to think that they're hiding big chunks of money from people who have better purview than them. So I would also guess that crypto is kind of a wart on the rear end of major global finance. So crypto is millions and billions, and what's really going on is billions and trillions. So when Trump wipes $5 trillion worth or whatever out of the stock market, that's the classical financial system. It's not Bitcoin, or crypto. So crypto is interesting, and it's bigger than the folks here, but it's small compared to the whole thing.
Maybe, except watch what happens if he is able to generate tariff revenues, and those tariff revenues get put into the National Strategic Crypto Reserve, which becomes the biggest Ponzi scheme you've ever seen.
Sounds
The biggest
lucrative.
Ponzi scheme you've ever seen is the stock market, I think.
Well,
no offense to those.
No, they may build one bigger than that.
Maybe. I don't think it'll be crypto because crypto's got too much friction. The literally trillions of dollars sloshing around the economy, global economy. It's not like at some point it's too big to hide, right? And they're doing it at $1 trillion levels right now in the open. So crypto's, it's interesting, but it's like the minor detail stuff, backroom tactical stuff. It's not big strategic stuff, I think.
The risk with cryptocurrency is that it may supersede the SWIFT system eventually. And the SWIFT system is what anchors the US dollar dominance. And that's in the cards, But I mean, I wanted to go someplace else. I mean, Trump is one character in a long list of characters of that appeared on the world scene, from Mussolini to Franco to Hitler. I mean, Stalin, you name it. And in almost every case, these guys got elected by a group of industrialists who felt they need to have a demagogue in place who can dominate the public discourse, is supported by the masses, links to the common people, and has them follow direction. And in every single case, they lost control. And these guys ended up doing something that wasn't in the game plan to start out with. When you think about the Heritage Foundation and Plan 2025, I mean, that's just being executed, right? So who are the people behind the Heritage Foundation? And that's a pretty large group. There's not like one single bad guy. I mean, these are groups that dominate, the financial markets, and they have really banded together under this under this Project 2025 banner. And so, if you want to know where they are planning to go, just read it. It's pretty straight up. I mean, you can do an AI analysis of it, and you find out what do they want to do here, there, and there. I did this with the food system. What do they plan on doing for the food system? And it's very, very transparent, and that's exactly where they're going. So I just published a newsletter yesterday that got picked up by a Washington DC paper. They restacked it and published it in their newsletter. And that's basically saying, here is the new Secretary of Agriculture, who instantly goes into a confrontational mode with the European Union and with other trade partners, saying you must buy our agricultural products. Well, why do the Europeans not buy American beef? Well, because it's full of hormones and antibiotics, and we are washing the chickens in chlorine, and the Europeans are thinking, I'm not going to eat that. No, and then our grains are full of glyphosate, and Piers Bayer making, now using, this revised political theater on getting themselves off the hook on liability for glyphosate causing cancer and other diseases. And we know that glyphosate is toxic in the food supply, right? And the American farmer just doesn't want to take it out. It's not the farmer, it's the corporate farmer, people that operate 20, 30,000 acres of land. So there is a lot of industrial push. These industrialists think they can finally shackle off from environmental laws, labor laws, and what have you, and really go for it. And this is not one person. There is really a sentiment, that has taken root in thinking that if we could just, free ourselves from these liberal ideas of how to run a society and an economy, then we can really make some money and we can really dominate markets. So it's no big mystery. The thing is, it's not going to work because the group of people that is running the administration right now, as Pete rightfully states, a bunch of children. My God, Pete Hegseth is the Secretary of Defense. He goes out gloating to Iran, what he's going to do to them. The Iranians could sink the global economy in a heartbeat. They're going to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, blow up a few oil tankers, and you're going to have an incredible mess. This is just not going to work, But you don't see that reality perspective. The Chinese have dug in because the Chinese are now going to put a block into the path, and they're not going to yield. Well, so what happened here? The Chinese just cut off all access to rare earth. 90% of rare earth that we use are coming out of China. Well, guess what? They just blocked, they just stopped, right? So how much supply do we have? Who knows? Maybe a couple of months, maybe 3-4 months, right? And then it gets really tricky to do phones and computers and batteries, all kinds of electronic parts that are, even the US military depends on these rare earth materials. So it's completely insane to fight with China, which is dominating, our strategic imports and stuff that they're making. But here they go, right? So now we are in this stalemate, and the Chinese are not the ones going to back down. So Trump is now going to find some way of, I didn't really mean it, or we found a different way to win this game, and he's not. And so this is insane. We are in the same, and I've been talking about Germany, in the 1930s in Germany. That's where we are, right? This is just unfolding. And it's not logic. It's not that there is a master plan of some sort. These guys are going to stumble into international conflicts because you can't screw around with other countries and civilizations, and harm them without having blowback. And if you do it with the entire world all at the same time, well, good luck. We pissed off the Europeans, the Canadians, the Mexicans really took it hard when we forced them to take GMO corn full of glyphosate. They have been bitterly fighting, and then the American position is there is no science backing this up, that glyphosate is harmful. So, you have to buy it because of the trade agreements and all this stuff. No, we have completely erased any goodwill around the globe, and we have put ourselves into a completely untenable position. And the question now is, how do you maneuver your way out of it? So I'm going local. I started. I just connected with all the soup kitchens, with the local school district, with local farmers, the most local farmers, and we're working on a community event to bring the attention of the public to, here's what's happening. They're cutting $230 billion out out of the Farm Bill. And 80% of the Farm Bill is nutritional assistance programs for SNAP, WIC, Meals on Wheels, school meals, food banks, right? So what's going to happen with that? You know, I mean, that's a lot of money. And in addition to it, they canceled programs to help local farmers, small-scale farmers, to reach markets. They just cut it, right? So you already have farmers who invested money buying equipment and doing stuff based on grants that they were promised or that they were approved, and now they canceled the grants. And the farmers are out holding the bag. So that's the kind of stuff that we should focus on, in my mind, local, and to really explain to people who voted for this guy and who think this is somehow magically turning into something good. Better pay attention to your own community and secure yourself.
Thanks, Klaus. Dave.
Yeah. So to what you're saying, Klaus, the Chinese are digging in. That they're not likely to cave, but you know, you say that you talk about us being in a place where even for our military capability, we're dependent on Chinese imports. And I would just have to ask, do you think that's a smart place for us to be in a long-term strategic sense, that we would be dependent on Chinese imports for our military strength? Because they're most likely our biggest military threat, at least to our nation. And I mean, just to put this in context, I'm not a Trump fan. I didn't vote for Trump. And I've lost $1 million in the last month. So, you know, this stuff is not, you know, completely, I'm not completely neutral on the effect of this, but it does seem to me that we are the biggest, we're the richest nation in the world, not per capita, that's Luxembourg, but in terms of actual aggregate wealth. And if you take Trump's policies at face value, which is probably not too smart, but if you take them at face value, they are, generally speaking, they're pro-worker. They're designed to reduce income inequality. They would tend to have an influence on wages and foreign investment in this country. So basically, they're putting the legal force behind the idea of Buy American. Is it wise for us to be, if we are entering into a darker phase of human affairs, which is not necessarily only in this country, but it's happening around the world, would it not be wise to be thinking about being self-sufficient and not dependent on foreign imports, to have within our walls the ability, within our borders, let's say, the ability to make all the things that we need to consume? Now, the biggest problem I see with the tariff stuff is that Trump is so inconsistent. I mean, if you're a company and you're thinking, okay, well, let's build a factory inside the US, do you trust that Trump is going to stand his ground on this? That's a big question. If you're talking about putting millions of dollars into building a factory, and then he flip-flops on it and he just decides not to do tariffs, you're in a really shitty, fucked up place. So the problem with this policy is that his history I think is so inconsistent that no one can trust him that he's gonna, that, you know, if the tariff policy, even if it is a good thing, nobody can trust him to stick with it. And for it to work, it has to be something that he would stick to long enough for people to actually see benefits out of it, which could take years. So, you know, generally speaking, closing borders is not, he's doing something that's orthogonal to every administration in the last 50 years. That's clear. Republicans typically like open borders because it gives them cheap labor. Republicans typically like open borders because it gets them more Democrats. So no one really has been too strong on borders for a lot of years. But, you know, closing borders actually should have a positive impact on wages, and should reduce income inequality. And so should tariffs. You guys disagree, but I think it's very clear. There's no tariffs if you're building and manufacturing inside this country. You can wiggle all you want.
Well, the wiggling is meant to show dissent while somebody's speaking without interrupting them. So, Dave, I think it's unnatural that we don't have more of that when we talk.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
we're not trying to diss you and be nasty. We're just saying that piece of your logic didn't make sense to us. That's all.
Yeah. Well, good to know.
Yeah.
This
on the other hand, is a different gesture altogether.
Whatever they mean. Okay. I recognize that I'm not speaking to the choir on this, but if you agree that income inequality is one of the biggest problems, it's not a climate change level existential threat, but I think it is one of the biggest threats to our economic order. Then I think it's fair to examine these policies in the light of what its effect is going to be on income inequality.
So since you're bringing that up again, Gil posted in the chat, just as I was thinking also, I do not see how any of Trump's policies help income inequality at this point. A bunch of the other stuff you said, I'm willing to entertain, that maybe this works out differently than we think, et cetera, et cetera. And certainly he's enforcing Buy America First. But if you read like what's behind where industries are located and how manufacturing works and what skills who has and how long it takes to move those things around, the idea of instantaneous tariffs that having some instantaneous effect seems to be delusional.
Believe me, I'm not suggesting that any of these have an instantaneous effect, and that's where the trepidation comes in.
But the imposition of tariffs immediately at these brutal rates doesn't help that process.
No, just like again, I'm talking about strategy, not tactics here.
But Dave, could you explain, Dave, how you think that he's aimed at reducing income inequality? Because I've never heard that said, and I'm not seeing the signs, but so I don't understand what your thesis is there.
Well, my thesis. Okay, so number one, so to me, the borders and tariffs are consistent with each other. So they are basically erecting walls around the country, and they're basically isolationist type policies. So I don't know if you remember, I don't know if I haven't seen this in a long time, but I remember there being a lot of bumper stickers and things, Buy American, right? Buy American. We have, for the last 30 years, we've been outsourcing our manufacturing to overseas. And being an artist, being someone who is very interested in making things, it's clear to me that the know-how and how to make things is not just in the person who writes the blueprints, it's also in the people who are doing the building. And so what we have for the last 30 years, I think what we have been doing is we have been, by outsourcing the factories, we're actually been putting a lot of our know-how in these other countries. And they're, been pretty smart about taking advantage of that. You have a lot of companies that make a product for, let's say, Nike in the daytime, and then their night shift, they're making the exact same product with a different logo on it and selling it elsewhere. So you have, I was trying to do a very simple product about 5 years ago, and like it was a book binding type of thing. And when I started going around talking to bookbinders, they're like, well, if you want to go to a factory that can actually make everything in one place, you have to go to China. Because here in the US, you would need a general contractor that really has all that know-how and can figure out all the very specific niche providers and put that together, and actually costs you a lot more to do it here because in China, they've got all the know-how in one factory. So you can just go to the person who runs the factory and they can figure it out. They have all the abilities and materials. I decided not to go to China. I decided just to abandon the project. But we used to have all that. We used to be able to do that, something like that here. And so what I see in the kind of the putting the walls around it is a little bit of, if I'm going to be generous, which I'm not necessarily inclined to be, but if I were to be generous about this administration and what they're, whoever is behind it or whatever they're trying to do, I think it is to, put us a little bit on a diet. We've consumed and consumed and consumed for 30 years, and we've been buying and buying and buying, and we've gotten pretty dependent on cheap products and slave labor and foreign imports. And I'm not sure that's necessarily healthy for our nation, or especially for wages. And what's happened with all this overseas outshoring, offshoring, or whatever you want to call it, of production, is that we have pretty much decimated the blue collar kind of working class of the country. And I don't know if the tariffs have any chance of bringing that back, but I do know that it would be just a long-term, do a lot of push-ups, muscle building kind of. It would take the kind of resolve and determination on administration that I don't see in the administration that we have. But I don't want to throw out the policy because I don't trust the people who are executing it. That's my 2 cents on it.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks for nicely bringing up a different point of view from what we were sort of saying here, and defending it in different ways. There's a lot being said and written about the Trumpocalypse or the Trump policies and all that. And it's really interesting to sort of share perspectives on how this is playing out. It's very odd to be alive during this time to witness this whole thing kind of firsthand. Sean, please.
I heard an analysis of a report basically on Trump's behavior at his recent Bedminster golf tournament this past weekend, and it was utterly transparent that basically he cheats so colossally. His behavior is that of a 3-year-old. His psychosocial development is so impoverished that it's completely evident that his mommy and his daddy did not raise him right, and he just didn't go through the milestones after that of a 3 or 4-year-old. So any imagining that that he's a 4D chess player, and that these spastic policy changes that we're seeing coming down the pipe are 4D chess. This man is really only capable of checkers, and so con artistry and scams and shysterism and patent medicines, he can pull off those sorts of operations. And we've gotten ourselves into a situation here where democracy has so devolved that it has coughed up this miscreant as the holder of the football, the one with the big red button on it. And this is a very exciting time. How we're going to get through this situation where we've got this man-child at the tippy top of the hill. It's all
indeed. Thanks, Sean. Pete, do you mind if I sneak in for a second with different sort of look on how this might? I did just on my own during the pandemic, I did 3 videos about the global financial crisis. And one of my insights in the global financial crisis was that because there was flawed math behind all these derivatives, they had above average returns, which meant everybody insisted that everybody put their money into these above average return instruments, even though nobody fully understood how they worked or what was going on. The result was a lot of the money on the planet was actually in these CDOs, CDSs, et cetera, the credit swaps. and also the derivatives on those, which really blew my mind, that you could insure things you didn't own, et cetera, et cetera. That was just completely nuts. If you watched The Big Short or read The Big Short, you got a really nice take on the story. But also The Big Short movie and book make really clear how much pressure people were under who had the right alternate perspective of, this is completely a bubble, it's going to blow up. We need to basically leverage against it and hold that position until the thing falls apart. And that was torturous. It was incredibly, incredibly hard. So I'm saying all of this about the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009 by saying Paulson and a couple of other people invented a mechanism that caused the entire world's money to be poured onto a platform that then a few people knew enough to jump off early, that changed where money was on a really large scale. It was huge. It was a tremendous scheme. What if the tariff ploy is exactly that kind of thing? If you, by fiat, can announce tariffs on everybody that are government collected and you run the government, I'm not sure how those funds are supposed to be collected or dispersed, or where those funds actually go. What if this is a way to just scare everybody into putting a whole bunch of money into a pocket that you can then drain off some other way? I don't know, but I think it's interesting because the big financial plays of the last multiple decades are things like that, where you have to get everybody's money onto some merry-go-round and then know enough to siphon off as much of it as you possibly can. And I hadn't actually thought about that until this conversation, but the light parallels to me are really interesting. And Trump is using and stretching laws to do so because there's a whole bunch of lawsuits against his ability to even do tariffs at this level, that he's not supposed to be able to do this, period. But the courts, he's discovered, are really slow, and the Supreme Court of the land keeps backing him. So what good are lawsuits anymore, right? So I think there is this mechanism being spun up that could end that way, and it frightens me no end. Sorry, Pete, that was not as short a digression as I thought, but I just wanted to put that in the conversation. So off to you in the booth now.
I'll take a beat too.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. I like that. And it makes a lot of sense, I think. Dave, I kind of wanted to reply to you. I feel you, man. I too think income inequality is one of the biggest problems in the world. Maybe not the biggest problem. I think what we're seeing with the tariffs thing is literally the largest anti-American attack that we've ever seen in world history. So it's by saying anything that sounds good about tariffs, it creates a wall. Americans are going to learn how to even saying something like even coming to the conclusion, well, maybe it's stupid for now, but maybe it's like taking your vitamins and doing push-ups and stuff like that. It's a way of rationalizing something that is just destructive to American interests. And I have to say, I want to say this a little bit carefully. I'm a patriotic American. I love my country. I love what we have built here. I love the American citizens. I think it's the most important and one of the most successful, experiments in history. I think it's a wonderful thing. Parts of the American experiment have ended up, I think, in exacerbating global disaster and things that are bad for people. The big parts of that are actually financialism and postmodern capitalism, where billionaires get rich and poor people get poor. So I think what we're seeing is more of the same. I think when tariffs are explained as a way of protecting the US, it's a way of hearkening back to American exceptionalism and American isolationism from like 1850 to 1930 or something like that. The thing that happened after World War II the thing that happened with World War II, actually, if you look at the way the finances worked out, and then afterwards, America and its billionaires figured out how to take over not just the US, but all of the globe, right? So, and there were a lot of bad things about that. America and its billionaires did a lot of really terrible, horrible things to the world under the guise of democracy first and peace and love and harmony and American values. They did a lot of bad stuff. But another thing that happened out of that was a global community of countries more or less working together to raise the bar for most people. Not everybody, certainly. There were certainly a couple billion at the bottom where it just got worse. But the bar kept raising for health and prosperity and even equity and things like that, equal things, equal opportunities for people, very unevenly and not in any kind of like best way. But we built a system, and back to your first question, Dave, does it make sense to have like key parts of F-35 engines rely on certain metals that are only coming from China? You know, that's a great question. And the answer is no effing way. That's incredibly stupid. The stupidity of it is actually exacerbated by the American decision after World War II to invest in war machinery, defense machinery, quote unquote defense machinery. So we ended up like one of the trajectories that we ended up with was we're going to make sure that we're safe, and we're going to make sure that, and that turned into almost my friend in Japan said, you know, hey, check out this airport. It's built on the, you know, where it used to be ocean. And I'm like, why would you build an airport on the ocean? And he's like, well, you know, it's nice that we now have an airport. But it also turns out this is one of the social support mechanisms for Japan. Japan didn't have the opportunity to build defense stuff as much as the US because of the way the war worked out, but they could put a lot of money into construction. And so in Japan, one of the things that they had for decades was we're just going to construct everything, right? Even airports out into the ocean. And it's a way of keeping the economy going and keeping productive in some certain way and making sure that a big chunk of the economy is solvent, right? The US did that with defense. And so we spend some god-awful amount, you know, multiples of defense more than any other country, right? A lot of that is just social welfare, more or less, making sure that the company is growing and stuff. Anyway, so in a perfect world, it wouldn't be F-35 engines that would be held hostage by China's stranglehold on strategic metals. It would be something like tractors, or GPUs for AI or something. I don't know, something else. And those things are actually on the block too, right? As China tightens its chokehold, but you don't want to be beholden to your neighbors and have one of your neighbors saying, I'm going to pinch this and you're going to die. You just don't want that. But on the flip side, you do want, or where we got to was a global economy that says, I'll make this stuff, you make that stuff, you're good at that, I'm good at this. Let's do trade. Let's gather each other's interests in a basket and all support each other, right? So it's like, you know, I've got 40 acres and you've got 40 acres and she's got 40 acres over there. I could, you know, maybe I could grow everything on my 40 acres that I need. And I could just build a big wall because I don't trust the neighbor. And I especially don't trust the lady over there. You know, a better way to do it is for me to say, well, I'm gonna grow half of my crop is going to be whatever is, you know, really good. Half of my land, sustainably mixed. I'm looking at Klaus now going, oh my God. I was just about to say, I'm going to plant all soybeans or something stupid like that. But anyway, you know, half of my output is like stuff that I trade. And the other half is stuff that I really want to make sure that so if my grandma needs her mugwort supplements to make sure that her cancer goes away or whatever, I'm going to make sure I'm going to plant that, right? I'm not going to buy it from the two farms over where I don't trust her. But to the extent that it makes sense, you want to be a community of 10 farms or 20 farms in a bioregion and all have a nice trade thing and all be partially dependent on each other and partially helping each other, right? So when some country who's taken over a bunch of other people's farms, by the way, when some country says we're going to build walls and we're going to do everything inside, it's a sub-optimization of the global economy. And maybe that would have been okay if 100 years ago we decided that the US was going to be self-sufficient and just stayed that way. You know, maybe that would have worked out. I don't think it's as effective as a global economy, but the US is so big. By the way, California, as a Californian, by the way, Californian is pretty productive compared to the rest of the country. I don't think we should split off, but you know, it's really hard now. Going, we have California has the what biggest economy in the, you know, so anyway. And this guy in Washington, D.C. is saying that he's got control of everything. I don't know. Anyway, it's a lot better to have a bigger economy, more friends, more cooperation, things like that. Isolating yourself down to your 40 acres and saying, I don't trust anybody else and I'll shoot you if you come over here. It's a way to lose. It's not a way to win. And that's what we're doing. So I think somebody's have decided that the US got too big for its britches. And they said, you know, we're going to push this anti-American agenda. And they've been doing it for 40 years. And they're winning right now by being anti-American. When Trump says, make America great again, America first, all that kind of stuff, it's propaganda and rationalizations that have been fed through a machine that make it make sense to enough people that he can win an election and promulgate this anti-American agenda upon us and upon the world. So he wants to, you know, somebody wants to take apart globalism. Somebody wants to take apart American hegemony. Somebody wants to destroy Pax Americana, and they're succeeding at the moment.
Pete, I don't want to interrupt you. I hear everything you're saying, and
Please,
I
yeah.
agree with most of it. Maybe not the last bit that there's some conspiracy or some, you know, malevolent force behind it, but substantively agree with everything. I'm just stepping in to say I have to go because I have another meeting, and it has nothing to do. This is a very rich and productive and interesting conversation. I don't want anyone to interpret my vanishing as in any way
Thanks, Dave.
Other than, you know, just I gotta go, I have another meeting. So
have a good call. Thanks
I do
for being
appreciate those points, Pete, and I think I would love to have a deeper conversation on this with people who are interested. So I'll just put that out there. It doesn't have to be hijacking Jerry's call, but
this is not
I think
hijacking. This is
okay.
good. This is good OGM.
I think it's super topical and super interesting. And as an artist, I like when new and strange things happen, that because it does sort of create a break in the status quo, which I think has been needed for a long time. So that is the one thing that I see that's positive in the current circumstance, that there's something is breaking. So there's some, and I think, Jerry, I'm really excited to see where you go with your explorations of what does that make possible. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Me too.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Dave. Pete, are you complete, or would you like to add a little more?
I want to say something about conspiracy theories, and I feel bad that Dave left.
You know,
because in a way it's a
to
reply to Dave. So
we'll report him to the recording at this moment in the call.
I am one who is I love a good conspiracy theory, and a lot of times I think they're junk. Part of my passion about that particular conspiracy theory that this is an anti-American junta, it's like it's just too perfect. If I wanted to destroy the U.S. global U.S. hegemony, this is exactly what I would do. And you know, it's not like I would flip through a catalog and say this one, page 56, destroy the country by whipsawing global tariffs and stuff like that. That's not the way it worked, right? It was a lot more like they had a 200-page catalog and they flipped through it and they kept flipping through it. And they said, we're going to hire this guy and that guy and see how they do at promulgating this one or that one, right? For me, conspiracy theorist that I am, I guess, it's pretty clear to me that Mr. Trump was selected out of a large pool of contestants, we'll say, kind of like a game show. And he was the one who rose to the top in the ability to be utterly clueless with what he was doing and utterly powerful in his ability to win over the hearts and minds of an American electorate, or at least close enough to half of it that he could win an election. And then the particular things that it would have been, it could have been a bunch of stuff, right? I'm going to put 50% of U.S. Pensioners in gulags or something like that, or it could have been we're all going to grow, actually maybe our agricultural system has already been taken over by, it could have been any way of taking down the hegemony that made sense with an interlocking set of other people. And this whole thing needs hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of people saying, oh my God, tariffs are the most amazing tool in our shed. Let's deploy those. It's not that I think that was chosen a priori. It's the one that ended up winning the race of how can we destroy this thing best, right? There were lots of places being shaken and tested and found to be wanting or found to be an effective means for explaining, giving a rationalization for what incredibly stupid thing that we were going to be doing would be done, right? So, and so it's luck of the draw that we ended up with Mr. Trump. It's luck of the draw that we ended up with tariffs. It's kind of like the big marshmallow man in Ghostbusters, right? I was trying not to think of, I was trying to think of Dan Aykroyd was saying, I was trying to think of the
Stay Puft
best
Marshmallow
thing,
Man.
yeah, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, something friendly from my childhood, and it turned into a monster. So tariffs is our monster for today.
Hank, you were actually patiently in the queue for a long time and then fell out somehow. I think we should go to you first and then Klaus and Gil.
Okay, thanks. Well, I'm listening to this conversation like I listen to most of the OGM conversations, and I agree with lots of stuff that's being said. But, well, all right, let me just say something I would have said earlier if I'd been in the queue earlier. I agree with lots of the things that Klaus said at the beginning of the call about messing around with other countries and other continents and all at the same time is a recipe for disaster. And I would say the view over here in Europe is that it's mostly because of the restraint of China and the restraint of Europe, at least at the moment, that we're not going to get into some sort of international disaster, which will be bad for the whole world. But aside from that, I wanted to say, as usual, I was very intrigued by Jerry's promotion of the call. Again, your words in these roller coaster times. Call for new thinking, but what kind of new thinking and what are we seeing that's working? And I'm not hearing too much about new thinking at the moment. One thing I would like to hear in the conversation are some of the things I think Mike called them rose-colored scenarios that he had right at the beginning of the call. Mike said there are a lot of them and haven't heard too much about them. But what I'd really like to hear, either in this call or in a separate call, is what kind of new thinking about new societal narratives can we imagine? And if we want to have new societal narratives and we want to put different messages about what may be coming next into stories in those narratives, what kind of messages should they be and what kind of stories they should be? And what's coming after modernity or post-modernity or whatever label people like to put on these times. A lot of paradigms seem to be converging at the same time. So it's a nice time to think about societal discourse and what new narratives might be useful. And that's how I interpreted, Jerry, you're asking about new thinking. So maybe for right now, it's good to hear some of the rose-colored, rosy scenarios Mike mentioned, but perhaps for the future call, I'd like to have our own intelligence, collective intelligence focused on what kind of narratives should we be promoting for the future and what kinds of messages and stories should be in them. That's my contribution at the moment.
Hey, thank you. I love that, and I want to do that. And it feels like we had some venting to do today that might lead to that. But I appreciate your bringing it up, and I think that bumps it up the queue for our next OGM or two. So thank you. I'm very fascinated by that question, obviously. Gil, please.
Yeah.
You're almost materializing out of the darkness, but not quite yet.
Gradual for some reason.
Yeah, what's going on? There you are. Heck.
Yeah, I wanted to take a beat also.
Cool.
I've raised my hand and taken it down a few times because there's so much here. So I really appreciate what Pete unrolled for us there, and it resonates with a lot of what I've been thinking and the mental floss practices that I've been trying to practice these days, which is a two-step process. Number one, follow the money, and number two, ask who benefits. And so, Pete, to your question about the who benefits from dismantling the Pax Americana, the list is fairly short. And in the newsletter that I dropped this morning, I offered a handful of speculations about that people have talked about and might consider. I would encourage people, if you haven't, to read yourself some Steve Bannon, who is extremely strategic. Surprisingly similar in some of his analyses to Bernie Sanders in terms of the impact of the last 50 years of policies on the American worker, but with a very different set of concerns that he's paying attention to and different set of remedies he's proposing. Can you guys hear me? I see my video is frozen.
Yes, your video is frozen, but your voice is coming through 5 by 5, as the radio guys used to say.
Yeah. And so in terms of the geopolitical plays, the economic plays, and the role of Trump in the mix, it's not quite like central casting went out and found him, but the central casting, when he appeared, said, oh my God, that's the guy we need. Let's bet on him as the front piece of these plays that are going on. I share, Pete, your it's not skepticism, grains of salt about conspiracy theories. It's easy to make these things look too tight and all in control. On the other hand, there are moves that are being made by people who have resources to make moves. And so I think that's worth understanding. I put a link up in the chat from a site called Epsilon Theory, a guy named Ben Hunt, who's an asset manager and political theorist who I've been following for some years, who's got, I think, some of the best assessment of how to interpret what's going on now. From the Pax Americana perspective, he'll say that the Pax Americana, which, by the way, has kept us out of global wars for 80 years after 2 global wars over the course of 30 years after centuries of constant warfare in Europe. So from some people's perspective, that ain't a bad thing. Massive prosperity here, although first half of it shared, second half of it very unequally distributed. And I'm sorry Dave has left because I didn't hear an answer from him about how he thinks Trump is in any way interested in reducing inequality, but another time for that. A bit more than 1 billion people lifted out of poverty in Asia Lots of positive benefit, of course, at the expense of environmental sustainability and and the living systems that sustain all this stuff. So there's that story in the background. And the deal was American Blue Water Navy keeps the sea lanes open for global commerce. American markets are open to the rest of the world to sell stuff to. So the trade deficits were an explicit positive part of the Pax Americana strategy. And I think Jerry, you posted. Did you post the thing the other day about your trade deficit with Costco? So you're going to raise tariffs on them. I mean, the tariff thing is a bullshit thing. The debt thing is a bullshit thing. The dependency on strategic materials from possible adversaries is not a bullshit thing. It's a very real thing. Notable among the massive investment that Biden, for all his flaws, was able to drive was massive investment in building American manufacturing capacity and building American semiconductor capacity, two of the things that Trump dismantled at the very first. So, what's he interested in really? For Trump personally, revenge is part of the game that he plays. For his backers and allies and oligarchs, it's a more complex game. And call me silly, but I don't think oligarchs are primarily motivated by national interest.
It's
I think that
really
a national interest, if it's convenient, is convenient. If it's not, it's not. And that's not the game that Elon and the rest of those guys are playing.
This game is incredibly complex and convoluted, we'll say that. Along the Bannon lines, I will say that I started reading Yarvin's Patchwork Nation. This is Mencius Moldbug, who is kind of this dark lord, smart guy, but kind of describing an anarchic, self-organizing world, except he likes monarchy and a bunch of other stuff that I don't particularly like. But
like monarchy and women in chains and a bunch of other things. But
exactly.
Yarvin is important because he speaks to part of that universe. He's not as geopolitically strategically grounded as Bannon is. And
Yeah, exactly.
Bannon doesn't run the show by any means. He's in and out and stuff, but he's one of the strategic threads, as is Dugin with Putin. And so you really need to read Bannon and Dugin to understand some of what's playing out in the n-dimensional chess game. Trump is not an n-dimensional chess player. He's playing checkers and classic crime family thuggery, but that's useful at a certain level.
Oh yeah, Dugin, Eric. We're going to put some links to Dugin in the chat for you.
Easy access into Bannon. There's a lot of stuff, but he had an interview with Ross Douthat in the New York Times about a month ago. That's very frank and very informative, very illuminating on a certain dimension of this tangle. And again, I'll just conclude with where I started, because I think this for me, this has been really important. Is Ben Bradley's famous quote from the Watergate days: "Follow the money." Number one, follow the money. Number two, ask who benefits. So on the one hand, you can see that there's a story about widespread American benefit by the tariff game. Maybe who benefits from taking apart the National Weather Service and the ability to predict, have good prediction for air travel. Who benefits by taking apart the best epidemiological data in the world? This is not just about cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. The federal payroll, Mike, you know the numbers. It's like 1 or 2% of the federal budget is payroll. So cutting headcount from federal agencies is not about cutting the budget. What's it about? Who benefits? Who benefits from the breakdown of functionality of an advanced society, and arguably, who benefits? Anyway, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Gil. Klaus, you've been very patient.
Yeah, who benefits is actually not very complicated. When you look at the Project 2025 and Heritage Foundation, most all of these guys are international, right? They all have global interests. You're dealing with the fossil fuel industry, you're dealing with the industrial food system, and when you look what is happening primarily in China, is basically that they are defanging the oligarchs. Right? In China, you cannot. I mean, anybody stepping out of line is being reined in. So the Chinese control the political process in China is controlling the oligarchs and the economy. Here in the US, if Kamala Harris had actually won the presidency, that would have been a restraint on these oligarchs and on these companies, because she was setting out to put these controls in. There were significant efforts to decentralize, to break these big conglomerates apart. Facebook, Meta, break those guys apart again, and foster competition and reduce the power that these guys have. So there is a very simple underlying interest group here, and it's basically wealthy people in the look at Peter Thiel, right? I mean, Peter Thiel came out very openly supporting this whole process there. They have great ideas of how the world order should be reformed, and they don't like nation states. They don't like powerful nation states that control them. So the European Union is putting constraints now on this. In fact, there are discussions right now for the European Union to intercept what are the power blocks in the US, which is Google and Meta, and X, and that would be the best thing they can do, in order to push back, on this influence into the European political process, because Elon Musk is the most obvious one meddling, but so is a bunch of others. So I think if you just read carefully Project 2025, and I did an AI profile on Peter Thiel, on Steve Bannon, on Elon Musk, what drives them, what is their philosophy, what have they published. I mean, it's really very transparent. And so that's and so that's actually sort of a repeat. And I keep saying back, Germany, where you had not just one or two, but an entire group of industrialists whose interests were impeded by a state, that was governing them, talking about incompetent bureaucrats wanting to put rules on them. So you have that same mindset here. And that mindset is deeply penetrated into the American business elites. That the government bureaucrats are just incompetent, and to some degree they're right. It's just that the way they went about this reform is to, first of all, defang. I mean, you're wondering why they're taking these regulatory machines apart. I mean, USDA just got basically handicapped. They laid off thousands of people who were controlling the industrial food system and becoming inconvenient. So you have that same thing, and so basically the regulatory machine is being neutralized, and that gives free run to industries that are very destructive. I mean, they don't want labor laws, they don't want environmental laws, they don't give a damn about climate change. Let's fire up some coal plants again, to take care of this electricity problem, energy problem. That's basically where it is. It's very simple. The only problem is it never worked. It always resulted in some war somewhere, because at some point in time they're running out of ideas, and then they just need to enforce where they want to go with military might, and then you end up in a mess. Sorry for my rant.
Pete. Thanks, Klaus. Pete.
Thanks, Klaus. I enjoyed that. Two quick things. A thing that I got off on a rant instead of or conspiracy theory or whatever. For a while I worked with a guy that a consultant whose job it was to go around to software companies and kind of he had a measurement methodology where he charged a lot of money, more power to him. He had a measurement methodology where he could tell you how well your software team was working and things like that, and compare them to other other things in your same industry. And so he had wide purview. Part of his IP and part of his sale was, I've got this library of hundreds of companies where I've already done this analysis. So I say all that to say that he knew what he was talking about when he talked about software development. This was a Hawaiian guy, so US, of Chinese descent. So he didn't look classically American. He was very patriotic American. And we got into, like depths and details that he would never get into with a client. And so part of his thing was, I cannot believe how stupid America was to outsource all our software development. This is in the middle of, working with a team that was onshore here and had a 2 or 3 times bigger offshore component in, as it happened, India. And you could never get the Indian folks to do the right thing because of cultural stuff and things like that. So you would literally say, move this thing 2 pixels, and they would come back and they've changed the color and changed, different stuff. And it's like, we were talking about why American companies think this is an efficient way to do software, right? Here's the deal, Pete. At some point, whatever point it was, like some year, that somebody came out, a bunch of management consultants came out with a thing. You can save tons of money by offshoring your software development to, wherever, right? Eastern Europe or India or whatever. And he said, you know what happened? A bunch of executives took the bait, and over the course of a couple years, you could get, a 100x, a 100% bonus. You could get 200% bonus. If you were an executive, you offshored your software team, you brought your bottom line numbers to your board, and you said, I need a raise, I need more stock, and they're like, oh my God, you're a genius. This is exactly what this company has needed. And poof, you get this bolus of money dumped on the executive for moving our productivity offshore. And what happens 2 or 3 quarters later? This guy could measure it. Here's where, bam, productivity went to 0. And it's like, so there you go. That's why we offshore things, because it made somebody an incredibly big bonus for a quarter, and then screwed everybody for dozens of quarters after that. So the bad guys in this whole financial sphere are the people getting richer and richer. And back to Dave's point, more than a 1x, 1 to 7, or maybe even a 1 to 10 ratio between the top and the bottom is evil and bad, I think. Speaking of which, I learned that number from our good friend Jordan Sukuk. Jordan points to Mondragon, the cooperative in the Basque region of Spain. Jordan is back in play. So I'm really replying to you, Hank. Jordan is starting from a very small base in Sandpoint, Idaho, where he's starting up a local, rose garden scenario, rose-colored glasses scenario of people, decentralized communities of people coming together to do what they think is right in coordination with other decentralized teams. He's starting from a very small place and wants to get really big, as I think we all know from his other attempts at the same thing. So expect to be hearing from Jordan on positive ways to move into a future that's uncertain and may hold calamity in a human way, and a human-centered and humane way. So there you go.
Well, Pete, thanks for that part at the end, because I was about to ask Mike. I was going to say, Mike, I hope that what you're about to contribute involves a story about ducklings or dolphins or puppies or something like that.
A happy thing. I do have another Zoom salon that meets once a week on Tuesdays, and it's the new rule. The last 5 minutes is reserved for optimism, and everybody bring 30 seconds or maybe just a joke. I was going to start with not a joke, which is in our discussion of conspiracy theories and international networks and Bannon and Dugan and all that. We didn't talk about the Catholic Church. And if you listen to Bannon, there's this theme of conservative Christian, well, Catholic groups, I mean, very arch conservative groups that want to go back to the Latin Mass. And they are driving a lot of this, or at least they're being used to recruit people into this vision of a future that will be a much better, more moral place. The inconsistencies are unimaginable. But it's not just abortion. It's not just gays getting married, and it's much deeper and much more theocratic, actually. So that's not optimistic at all. But I would point to a person we might want to recruit for this group. He would, like Greg, he'd bring a very different. Is it Greg Davis? What's his? The fellow who dropped off is.
Which Davis?
The one that was on earlier.
Oh,
Dave Gray.
Dave Gray.
Dave Gray, right? I got it back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Had the initials backwards. Anyway, I was on a webinar yesterday with Dean Ball, and he's half our age, which is one reason to get him. And he's somewhat of a libertarian or not psycho-libertarian.
Psycho-libertarian? That's a new category for me.
I think we need to coin that. I should definitely copyright that phrase. No,
Absolutely.
He's cyber libertarian, and he's arguing on the need for new approaches to AI regulation. And he actually has some very good ideas on how if we put a lot of this on the state and local state governments, which after all are responsible for a lot of consumer protection law, that we might get somewhere. But he also has written two really interesting essays, and they're only like 2 pages long, on what the future could work, how the future could work. And AI is part of this new tool for governance that he envisions, allowing us to use AI to pretty much audit companies or agencies or nonprofits without them exposing anything. So you kind of have these AIs that come in and go, okay, you're a oil company. Are you leaking too much methane? And these AIs would snoop around, AI agents would snoop around and see what the company's own meters are seeing. But the nice thing is the company would not have to feel that it's exposing trade secrets. It would just be able to be honest with the AI agent, and the AI agent would give a clean bill of health or not. It would probably go back to the company and say, hey, we're seeing these anomalous readings in this one oil field. What's up? And there could be a sort of a continual monitoring. Also, I mean, it gets a little weirder when you start using the same kind of logic for personal safety, but that would definitely make a lot of MAGA people happy to have safer streets. But anyway, I'll send this thing out. I do not agree with this, but if you think it's useful, I could reach out, and I'm sure he would enjoy sharing his opinions, because he has many.
Sounds like. Definitely. Gil, please.
Yeah, I want to accept Mike's invitation to be positive in the last 5 minutes. So in the disarray, I think we're already seeing lots of initiatives from state governments and local governments to try to step into the gap in good things. California is just one example, but really all the left coast states are doing that. And not just in terms of environmental policy and social policy, but California is also very rapidly trying to negotiate trade deals overseas with China and others that say, look, we're the 5th largest economy in the world. Let's have a different tariff regime than the federal government is imposing. And whether that will work or not, I don't know. But we see that. One of Trump's recent moves has been to instruct the Attorney General to go after state initiatives in a bizarre reversal of traditional conservative states' rights philosophy. In my experience, conservatives are in favor of states' rights when states do things that they want, and not when they do other things. But I think we're going to see a lot of local initiatives. There's a post on LinkedIn this morning, and Klaus, I tagged you in it. by someone speculating that the disarray in the speculative markets may return attention to real assets like land and productive capacity, and maybe an opportunity for regenerative development there. So I haven't dug in detail, but I've tagged you so you could look at that. And, you know, I'm reminded that in what we call the Dark Ages in Europe, there was actually an enormous flowering of local creativity, intellectual capacity, art, and in fact, a significant amount of commerce. You know, international commerce is not a recent thing. There was massive international commerce from Europe and Asia in the 13th century and even earlier, and of course, the Roman Empire before that. So we've seen waves of globalization and localization over the years. We've seen comparative advantage in trade before. So, you know, doom is rarely final doom. You know, in a worst case here, we may be in for decades or centuries of a real mess. And something will emerge from that. And whether it emerges in years or decades or centuries, we don't know. And maybe we have some hand in that in some kind of ways, which I guess is one of the reasons we'll get together here Thursday mornings, is to explore that. You know, where might we have a hand in agency of asking the question, what might be possible in this mess? You know, what new opportunities open up? Part of the work is defensive. I mean, you know, keeping them from tearing apart Social Security is a political and social interest of mine, and it's a personal interest of mine because I'm in that cohort where it really matters to Jane and me. So there's a level that's defensive, and the pushback is working to some degree. I mean, the Social Security teardown has been slowed down. They were going to shut down telephone support. Yesterday, they said, no, they're not going to shut down telephone support. Why? Because people jumped up and down and screamed at their congresspeople, and their congresspeople jumped up and down and screamed at the White House, and the White House pulled back. So there's that part of the game. And the other part of the game, which I think is more of our focus here, is what can be built, what can be generated, what can be nurtured in the midst of this mess? What opportunities open up here in the midst of the chaos to do something that's valuable?
I believe we have our topic for next Thursday.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer to the question is, but I like the question.
Yeah, cool. Klaus, you may be having the penultimate word here.
Yeah, and on a positive note, this is a phenomenal opportunity to rebuild the system from the ground on up. So that's where I'm going. I've had amazing response in the community, you know, to where people are really scared. They see what's happening at the federal level, and the message that really resonates locally. My wife is engaged in several women's associations, and she had a group here yesterday, and they asked me to briefly, you know, talk about what I'm working on, and they're all in flames because it's getting scary, right, at the local level when you have federal support systems collapsing. And so to build a community response to this, so my point is there's a lot of regulations that inhibit small business development in local communities. There is a lot of regulations that keep small businesses out of markets because they're dominated by large international groups, which do their best to create regulations that make it very, very difficult for newcomers and small entities to enter markets. So there are, and particularly when you think about food is at the base of the economy, right? You can create employment opportunities and business opportunities in the food sector in a heartbeat, instantly. You know, so that message resonates, and you have small scale farmers. You know, so I'm collecting these nonprofit groups that are all so helpless when it comes to understanding business principles, understanding, you know, market development and so on. So I'm developing AI capacity, you know, to have agents that can assist in answering questions. How do I review this contract? How do I find a market for this product? Things like this. And I think there is just endless opportunity. We just need to refocus. because there's nothing you can do with this mess that's going on in Washington right now. I mean, the idea to go to Washington for a lobby visit with the Sierra Club is just ridiculous. I mean, if no one is going to listen. It's just a waste of time and money. But to influence your city council by saying that we have a regulation in place here that makes no sense, and here's what it does, right? That can have a real impact, citizen activity. So that's where I suggest going.
Thanks, Klaus. Ken, we've reached the end of our time together, and I'm hoping you have a poem that addresses things like federal support systems collapsing or AI regulation or something like that.
I think one of the things that's going on beneath all this is cruelty. So I'm going to read a poem called Kindness, which I've read before. It's thanks, Mike, for suggesting a focus on something less than direness here. So this is Naomi Shahib Nye. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride, thinking the bus will never stop. The passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out the window forever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where an Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you, how he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoe and sends you out into the day to gaze at bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, "It is you I have been looking for," and then goes with you everywhere like a shadow or a friend. I will post that to the list.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Even
Thank
more
you, Ken.
extraordinary than usual.
Mhm. Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you.
Gift.
Thanks, everybody. And I think we've got our topic for next Thursday. So start plotting, start scheming. What are the positive things we might do? And in the meantime, have a good week out there.
Thanks.
Bye.